All right, we're back with the Skyscraper in the Park, part 3. Take a look at these images for a minute. On the left, we see the spire on top of the Empire State Building. You've heard the term spire before. It certainly didn't look like this when we saw it on the Orthodox churches of Novgorod or on any of the other examples, did it? But it takes on that form. You can instantly recognize this as a spire. What's the general theme that we're looking at? I've got it on the slide, so you know we're into Art Deco. Art Deco is the name given to the global decorative modern 20th century aesthetic movement that developed all across the world in the 1920s and the 1930s. Art Deco was visible in all visual media: architecture, product design, graphic design, interior design, fashion, textiles, film, and photography. Just do a quick YouTube search for Art Deco and you'll see an incredible array of people and exhibitions and examples of Art Deco and what it has been perceived to mean. Take a look at these images. Jot down a few notes. What do they have in common? Anything? Pause it and go ahead and take some time for that note taking. And now that you've come back, there are a few things that stand out. There's a repetition of geometry. We see in this little brooch, the jade brooch in the center, the way that those beads create a repetition of circular form. We see that again in the teapots in the bottom right, and of course in the outfit on the actress in the upper right. A repetition of lines of stepping also occurs in this little wallet, probably a card case or a cigarette case that we see on the bottom. And we see it in the stylization of the spire on the top of the Empire State Building. It's a practical move. There is this layering of aluminum metal surfacing, but it's done with intention, and it's countermanded by a series of lines, stripes that run the other direction, all creating what? A sense of energy, a sense of movement. These stair-stepped and repeating forms were supposed to give you the idea of something emergent, something not static. We'll see that in a little more detail in a minute. Where did the idea of Art Deco come about? It came to its first landing space in the public eye at the first major international exhibition of Art Deco. This was held in Paris in 1925, and the exhibition served as the inaugural moment of defining Art Deco as decorative modernism, and it established French domination in the luxury goods market, a segment that Art Deco objects targeted. Here we're seeing on the right a photograph of this exhibition, the international exhibition. Take a minute to study the buildings. This building in the foreground on the right. Are there any features that stand out to you? Anything recognizable? We have again that stair-stepped layered cake formation. This time, rather than the elaborate ornamentation and detailing that harkened back to Gothic architecture and Gothic facades, the buildings in the exhibition, for the most part, not that one kind of in the center in the background, that was there long before the exhibition was built. Most of them have these white, unornamented facades. This was a brand new shift. It was seen as radical. It was seen, as it's often seen by people now, as, institutional, as very dry, cold, is a term that's often given to it. When this style launched back in 1925, it was mind-blowing for the viewers. Within these not quite yet white modern boxes, but we're getting there in terms of architectural style, was something very different. And we see that difference in the exhibition poster on the left. What characterizes the image there? Jot down a few notes. There we see that repetition of forms that creates an idea of action. In the palm fronds, or the grass that is coming up from the ground at the foot of the primary character in the poster, there is again this series of radiating lines that give action to the image. At the top, we have these flowers in bloom. We have repeating lines going down the sides of the image, again, to give a sense of movement and energy. And then we have these two figures. We have a human figure in the front, wearing a draped garment, something like the modernization of a toga, right? And then this antelope or some other leaping animal whose own horns bisect the energy lines that are there to show the movement of that animal, the movement of that figure. All of this is done with intention. What the intention is, we're about to find out. Let's look at a series of Art Deco features. Things that when you see them, you know that the architect had Art Deco inspiration in mind. The first thing is what is called the tripartite facade. A tripartite facade just means it's made up of 3 bays, 3 separate sections. At the Leslie Hotel in Miami, we see that the center section is defined by these 2 fluted yellow column-like structures. That's the center of the tripartite facade. That's the center bay. Then to the left, 2 windows, and to the right, 2 windows. Those are the second and third bays of the building. We see this arrangement repeated here at Seaface Park in Mumbai. And I'm showing you this image and the images to follow to indicate that the idea of Art Deco, while it was triumphant first in France, it spread around the globe, from Miami to Mumbai and onward. This idea of the modern, this idea of the energetic, of this clean slate of a new style of building really took off. People were enamored by it. Some people hated it, again, because it wasn't what they were familiar with. It was too modern, it's too ugly in their minds. Another feature of Art Deco building is the corner entrance. We see this here in the Abbey Hotel, this ornamented corner with 2 spires at the top, as well as in the Empress Court at the Oval Maiden Esplanade in Mumbai. Here you can see that cylindrical forms paired up with rectilinear geometries is a clear sign of Art Deco inspiration. Jerry's Famous Deli, again from Miami on the left, has those rounded columnar forms at its side entrance. Here in Shangri-La of Mumbai, this building, built in 1939, definitely has these cylinders rising up from the ground plane to the height of the building, creating a series of attractive bay windows. From within the building, you would get a really nice 180-degree view of the view outside. And then here at the end of this long, energetic row of both columns and walkways. We have this beautiful spiral staircase and spiral columnar end space to the pavilion of Bexhill. That pairing of straight lines and circles, again, just gives an energy to the building that wouldn't happen if it met in a rectilinear corner. Here's another combination of cubes or cuboids and cylinders, beautifully displayed in this Art Deco style bungalow that was published in the Journal of the Indian Institute of Architects on the right, and the Miami Beach Post Office here on the left. Another feature of Art Deco architecture are eyelids, which are semicircular canopies and sunshades. They exist to do exactly that, to shade windows from the sun. But their exaggerated shape, their repetition, here in that central image you see the eyelid and then a smaller one and a smaller one and a smaller one above that. Of course, those top three aren't providing shade to the window. They're there as ornament. They're there as decoration. And they re-emphasize the Art Deco influence on this building, those repeating stair-stepped forms. Buildings with curved corners, which had faceted windows, often also have cantilevered sunshades called eyebrows. So if the prior slide had eyelids, these elongated sunshades are called eyebrows, and they generally wrap around the corner of a building, creating again an energetic line of flow, horizontal flow to the building. On the left, you see eyebrows on the Marlin Hotel in Miami, built in 1939, and on the right, you see the Gold Cornet in Mumbai, built from 1940 to 1949. Another feature which we have discussed, and I want to give you a few more examples, is the stepped ziggurat profile. The Plymouth Hotel on the left, in this celebration of pastels, of stair-stepping, of eyebrows, you see them on the sides, a side entrance, and a combination of cube forms and cylindrical forms is just taking all of Art Deco's cues and putting them into one building. Here we can see again the ziggurat's profile of the American Radiator building and of Aero Cinema, a beautiful building with elaborate Art Deco detail. Eyebrows, eyelids, corner entrance, cylinders, cubes, and that signature spire at the top of the side entrance. Vertical fluting is another Art Deco classic, but we've seen fluting before, right? We've seen fluting in the columns of the Greek temples. Here it's being reused to symbolize modern upward trajectories. While all of this emphasis on geometry, this formal emphasis, a way of looking at a building as just a series of shapes and a collaboration of shapes was going on, something else was also undergirding and supporting the Art Deco movement. You're going to watch a video by Trevor Noah on cultural appropriation if you haven't already. And that's exactly what's taking place here. A series of architects are trying to figure out, how can I make this building feel quote unquote exotic? How can I make it feel otherworldly? And we should hear all of those terms in their racist implications, right? There's nothing otherworldly about the architecture of Egypt. It's in our world. It's from Egypt. Those influences are part of human history. But the attempt to make something that was somehow exoticized, sexualized, alluring, brought this racialized point of view into the ornamentation of Art Deco buildings. We see it here in the Carlton Cinema in London. This sort of column, this sort of repetition of triangular forms, of leaf forms at the bottom of those two primary columns. Those are things that could have come straight out of Hatshepsut's Architect's Guidebook on how to create the perfect Egyptian theme. And we see it, of course, here in this photo of the dancer Chernychev wearing a costume designed by Sonia Delaunay for the Russian ballet. It was a way of marking her body as other. And just as Trevor Noah is going to point out, it's highly problematic. What brought on this Egyptomania? Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt's Valley of the Kings in November of 1922 led to an invigoration of Egyptian themes and motifs across modernist visual culture that we now know as Egyptomania. In that exhibition in Paris, there were examples of this, and that took off and was further globalized in architecture, furniture design, interiors, jewelry, ceramics, and ornament. The range of buildings that included these Egyptian themes included cinemas, skyscrapers, even factories. And many of these ornaments were hybridized and freely mixed and matched into a new aesthetic. In the 1920s and 30s, 75 films featuring Cleopatra and ancient Egypt firmly established Egyptian visual themes in the public taste and imagination. Now this is way before Netflix, when you might have an explosion of films. 75 films in a time where you might see 3 in a year and feel super fortunate. So you can notice here how this dancer in the costume of Cleopatra has been geometricized and abstracted, just as these forms have been in architecture. On the right, you're seeing the entrance to the Luxor Palace in Paris, built in 1921. There, the Egyptian themes are stunningly clear. And even in this storage warehouse in Chicago from 1921 and 22, we have that Egyptomania popping up. Now, there are many sides to this discussion, as Trevor Noah's video will point out. There's a tension between admiring the work of a culture and fully appropriating it for your own use. And we want to keep that debate in mind as we look at these forms. Here again, we're revisiting architecture we've already seen. In this period of modernism, where the aim for architects was to create a clean slate, in many ways they are calling up history without citing that history. We see this in Frank Lloyd Wright's project at the Hollyhock House in Los Angeles in 1921. Putting this temple form forward as if it was something new, something of his own invention, when of course it so clearly mirrors the work that he was looking at as he thought about designing this pavilion, such as the Temple of the Sun in Palenque, or the Temple of the Cross in Palenque. This Mayan roof comb inspired so many projects throughout the 1920s, without giving credit to the Mayans for this architectural invention. The stepped parapet, you can see the resemblance here. We've talked about it in conversation with the ziggurats, but it also takes after the forms of the Mesoamericans. And here you could see how that stepped profile, that ziggurat form, is not only a ziggurat form. Precedents for that step profile also come from the incredible architecture of the Indian subcontinent. If you are thinking about taking another course in the department, Professor Dadlani does an incredible course on the architecture of the Indian subcontinent, which is why we don't go into it further here. But on the right, you can see how those spires, those stacked forms reaching toward greater and greater height, are mirrored in the Eros cinema. Art Deco's mobility was not only in space and time, but across entire fields of design and visual culture, as I have mentioned. There's this pin or dress ornament on the left made out of jade, onyx, diamonds, enamel, and platinum. There are mask themes that are clear here, things that draw on histories of other cultures. Again, without naming their origin, and again, putting them forward as if this was a new modern invention. The historian Christina Cogdell has written a profound book called Eugenic Design, where she looks at the history of Art Deco, this history of cultural appropriation, and digs into the archives, digs into the writings of the architects, designers, developers of culture, visual culture at the time. And she gives us a summary of what's happening in this way. When thinking about Art Deco, she's saying it's as if the contemporary belief supposed that the mind of modern man had evolved to such great lengths, as shown through developments in science and technology, but his body had unfortunately lingered behind. As both primitive, and we want to trouble that word, and modern, then, Art Deco angularity metaphorically captured civilized man's development of technology, his colonialist powers, these powers of appropriation, and his desire for a long-lost vitality that he saw, that man saw, that we saw, or thought we saw in long-lost earlier cultures. What in the world does that say? At the height of North American capital, when we looked at those early skyscrapers in this section, when this section, this tier of the American strata is seeing their wealth, their ability to control nature through oil, through energy, through modes of manufacture, through globalized shipping. They're seeing that at its height and feeling themselves. They're really feeling themselves at this point. But at the same time, in order to give the form to that power that they're feeling, they're looking back at earlier cultures, looking back at that sense of strength, that sense of vitality, that sense of power that not only earlier cultures, but cultures that they just saw as other. And this would include people of color, nations of color around the globe. And it is straight up appropriation. Here are some of the examples of how this plays out. They are so blatant, it's ridiculous. So let's look at the North American First Peoples example here on the Penobscot building in Detroit. In order to give that building a sense of historic strength, they have created an Art Deco sculpture of one of the America's first peoples. Is it a compliment? You can tell me your thoughts on this. I'm giving you mine, but you certainly can give me your thoughts on this. Write them down and send them to me. The problem is, if it were a compliment, we would see a very different relationship between American capital and the indigenous people of North America. Here it's almost like a token, an anecdote. It's not an orientation of this company that is living, breathing, and working in this body, in this building. It's not their orientation toward the people that they're using as ornaments, toward the rich cultural history that they're using as ornaments here. The same happens in the Niagara Mohawk building in Syracuse. Is that ornament stunning? It's stunning. It's beautiful. But we need, as architectural historians or as people really thinking about visual culture, we need to dig deeper to also recognize what's happening culturally, what's happening in terms of race in these images. Here are a few more. Here on the left, we have these kind of Greco-Roman figures. They've got their sort of togas. And kind of comically, but also beautifully in their way, rather than handing out, let's say, the classic virtues that we would see again and again in Greco-Roman sculpture, which might be wisdom or beauty or truth. Here we have one of the figures, the one kind of in the center here, holding out a truck. It's a very funny turn from these, classical ideas of wisdom and knowledge to the truck, which is incredible in its ability to transport goods. But you see what's happening? You see the slips that are happening here? Same thing is going on here. Here, the winged god Hermes is holding a modern airplane. Now, there's a smart elision there, right? The god of swift feet, the god of transportation, is being tied into the creation of the modern airplane, which was mind-blowing and a marvel when it first appeared. Just want you to learn how to recognize the detail that's going on, to read carefully, to really read our built environment for the histories that are being told there. It's not just the built environment. Product design, industrial design took on these Art Deco ideas. You have to look a little more carefully, but here you can see this energetic form, the curvature of the car to display its speed even when it's sitting still. Those repeating lines in that radiator and that grille in the front. Now this aesthetic really moves from Art Deco into streamlining, and we don't have time to go into it now, but if you're interested on any of this further, this idea of race and ornament and Art Deco, definitely look for Christina Cogdell's book. A few more examples of how this shift turns up. We see it particularly in the Zephyr locomotives on the right, the Zephyr trains. The way Art Deco styling, these rounded corners, stair-stepped forms, come to style everything that we see. It doesn't stop there. And one could do, and many have done, an incredible history of the built environment, looking not at buildings, but at transportation, to see the way that this style, this idea took off. Streamlining took Art Deco and rounded its edges. It tried to give all of everything it touched, this vision of movement, of seamless airflow, an idea of speed and modernity that you see here. I'm going to end this for now. Thanks for sticking with me. I look forward to your thoughts on all fronts. Take care.